Graham, really good to have you on the Not Another Risk podcast. Your colleague Martin had a great time kind of talking to him as well, and we're going to kind of hopefully follow a similar format. But really, first of all, why don't you kind of introduce yourself to our listeners, and just feel free to give us the kind of unabridged version, because I know you also started your career in law enforcement.
Yes and no. First off, thanks, Simon. Great to be here. Really looking forward to it. I know you've had a chat with Martin, my friend. What about me? Well, my career started, believe it or not, working for a bank. Having left school, having not done as well as my parents probably would have liked me to, went into work for a bank. Didn't really enjoy it, although I enjoyed playing football for the bank, which I actually thought I was quite good at. I was probably the only one who actually thought that.
A legend in your own mind.
Definitely in my own mind. Moved on from there. That's where I applied to join the Met Police. I actually applied to join several different forces. The Met were the first to accept me, and that was in November 1982. And from there, I spent 17, almost 18 years in the Metropolitan Police, primarily in the CID. It's where I met Martin. We worked on a number of different places together, different CID offices, same CID offices, sorry. And from there, I moved out of there after 18 years into commercial investigations. So a lot of the stuff that I did within the police was particularly around either drugs, money laundering, under what was the Drug Confiscation Act, which was quite new when it came in, about taking the proceeds of crime back off the drug dealers, and also into fraud. Which was quite a difficult thing to work, because there was a fraud squad within the Met Police. But there were certain criteria, because the volumes of fraud even then were quite high. But having came out, I then went into what was fixed line telecoms, which was a company called MCR Wellcom, which is now Verizon Business, and that was based in the UK base was based in London. And I was part of the international security group.
Excellent.
There. And there I learnt all about telecoms fraud and about how it works from a fixed line point of view. Spent a number of years there. Moving on, for me, one of the best bits of that was it gave me an opportunity to work abroad, work with law enforcement agencies abroad.
Excellent.
But one of the things I found coming out of the police, where you have the opportunity to prosecute bad guys because you have a prosecuting agency. When you come out, you don't. You then have to go to the prosecuting agencies and try and convince them that you want to be able to. They should be prosecuted in that case. I think Martin will probably agree. It's very difficult sometimes to do it, not because they don't want to. It's just because of the volume. So you switch it. The actual work is very similar, but you switch your priorities. Your priorities around not putting the bad guys aside. It's actually stopping the bad guys. And how do you do that? And you do that by using whatever tools you have available to you. And those tools, they change as time goes on, because MOs change. Bad guys, they adopt different ways of doing things because they're very actually good. And some people might say you shouldn't say bad guys are good, but they are actually particularly good at some of the things they do. They adopt and they pick up on new technologies and new ways of doing things, and they exploit them for their own benefit. So for every team of investigators there are trying to fight bad guys, there are actually similar teams of bad guys trying to find ways to go round and circumvent the ways for their own benefit.
So is that kind of red team, blue team type, but in real life?
It is, and sadly, the real life thing is that at the end of it, there's a victim at the end of all of that. So particularly like at the moment, investment fraud is probably is the thing that I see that has the most impact. Some people different say, but there's so many different other types of fraud. Romance fraud, for instance, and APP fraud I know is something which is quite close to my heart at the moment. But investment fraud is something which is, the victims stand to lose an awful lot. The actual volumes may not be as high as some of the other frauds, but the actual amounts of money that the victims tend to lose, I think the FCA report recently said the average value of loss per victim of investment fraud is around £15,000.
I mean, that's a lot of money for people, sort of average people. You know what I mean? So that's a lot of money for anyone. But if we kind of we listen to the news, £15,000, no one's got that just lying around.
No, and if you think, sometimes when people set thresholds about what do we investigate, what don't we investigate, what do we look at, what don't we look at, £100,000 fraud is a big fraud. But to a large organisation, and no disrespect to the organisations, they have policies of insurance in place to mitigate them from that. £1,000 to a 75-year-old, which is part of all the savings they have, for me is a far bigger impact than £100,000 to a big organisation, because it's something that has a profound effect on them.
Yeah, real people, real harm.
Yeah.
So I guess your background's interesting for many reasons, but including because you can come at it from a slightly different angle. So from a, if you like, from a telecoms perspective, I think I'd certainly be kind of very interested to hear. So kind of how does a if you like a telecoms fraud work? I mean, how does that actually work? Tell me.
Right. So a fraud is a fraud. Is a fraud. Telecoms is just the means by which the bad guys create the fraud, actually use the fraud. So telecoms fraud it's a service provider. So you provide a service. So for fixed line telecoms, it can be you sell wholesale minutes.
Yeah.
So you'll have organisations which will make themselves up, create companies, go in, pretend to be what they're not, buy minutes, actually use the minutes. And because of the way that commercial billing is set up, you have 30-day terms, which means you've got 30 days service, you're billed on 30 days and you have 30 days to pay. So you've ended up with 60 days. And then you'll probably have another 30 days before the debts are start to be chased. So effectively, you've got 90 days. 90 days to use up minutes which you sell on, and then effectively you don't pay, you continue not to pay, you either collapse the company or you just vanish. There's a thing called long-firm fraud, and companies would set up half a dozen different companies, and they would basically run a very short period of service where they'd ramp up as much debt as possible and vanish, move on to the next company, repeat the process over and over again.
So I set up a company, and then that purports to just be buying minutes from Vodafone, other telecoms providers are available, and then what? I become a reseller, and then I just keep selling those minutes.
Yeah.
But then what actually happens is my customer, if I can call them that, they are actually getting the service.
Yes.
But I never pay Vodafone, let's say,
No.
or whoever. I never pay them as a business owner, and eventually my customer gets cut off, and I've disappeared, or I haven't disappeared. I've set up another company and done the same thing. I mean, that sounds like it should be quite easy to stop the second time I do it. I'm just going to put it out there.
It's a good question. But if you plan, you'll have a number of companies set up ready, and as one goes down, the other one is already up and running, ready to go. And as that one goes down, and it's almost like you hop from one company to another. Never the same people behind it. It's very easy to potentially hide yourself behind different company names. Company's House. I know there's the new ECCTA which has come out.
Is that so director identification?
Yes.
Yeah. So
and also it's created new offence of fraudulent trading.
of course, yeah.
But that only applies to obviously bigger, larger companies. But the Companies Act also has, I think it's Section 993, which relates to fraudulent trading for smaller companies and sole traders. So there is legislation out there. But the issue is, again, along with many enforcement agencies or organisations which are tasked with enforcement, either within their own organisation or on behalf of other people, is resourcing.
So okay. So I imagine I'm one of these fraudsters.
Yeah.
I mean, where would I be banking? It kind of I can't believe that I'd be banking at well-known high street banks. Would I be banking with kind of challenger banks and PSPs? Is that where I am?
Not necessarily.
No?
You can be anywhere. Some of the larger banks and some of the PSPs, they have, everybody has to comply with the anti-money laundering, with the KYC for onboarding customers. But if you have the information available, you can open an account quite quickly. Just because you're a big bank doesn't mean to say you don't have bad guys.
Yeah, of course. And so then as a let's leave big banks out for a second.
Okay.
And I think about it in terms of the, if you like, the secondary victims. The secondary victims being, smaller banks, PSPs, and of course the telecom provider themselves, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm a, and let's do that last. So if I'm a PSP, or if you like, or neobank, or a firm that's providing kind of banking as a service with nested customers, what steps could I take to see if I could actually, do I have customers that might be doing this? What sort of steps could we put in place to maybe identify those types of bad actors?
Everything revolves. You probably heard this before.
Yeah.
Revolves around data.
Yeah.
So every time you register for anywhere, you register data. You data about yourself, about where you live, about how people contact you, about any businesses that you have, your telephone number, email address.
Yeah.
And you'll have to provide a certain amount of identification through. And there are a number of different processes by what you can do that nowadays. It used to be you stand there with a picture of a passport, a driving license by yourself, and say, "I confirm that this identification is me," and then you give your name.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that everybody does that anymore now. But all that leaves data, and that data can and should be used to make sure that you are speaking to the right person. To stop every single fraud,
I
I'm
mean,
afraid you won't.
Of course, you
won't.
can't.
But what
You can't do that.
What you can do is you can provide a level of protection. So the phrase I use is the path of least resistance. What you don't want to be is the path of least resistance. You want to have a policy and a process in place which tracks customers to come in, make them register them, make sure they're safe, make sure their accounts and the monitoring what goes on in accounts is safe, and that you provide safeguards which mean that the bad guys, when they try, they know that they stand a very poor chance of actually getting in there. So they will actually direct their efforts elsewhere to people with less strict regulations or regulatory provisions inside to secure their customers, because it is all about protecting the customer, because the customers are the people who ultimately make the organisation either rich or poor. If you don't look after them, they're going to go elsewhere. And under the new PSR regulations, if you suffer fraud on your account, you're going to have to pay out 50% of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, some of the data that UK Finance have published, is it's eye opening. And I say, we spoke a little bit about that with Martin, and it's certainly worth a read. Then from a kind of telecoms provider perspective, because again, they're the secondary victim, aren't they? Actually, in fact, they're the primary victim. They're the people who are not getting paid in the first place. How can they think about, well, actually, when we're onboarding these resellers, how can we be convinced that actually it's
just a bit to stop you there. That type of fraud, wholesale type fraud, is not the only type of fraud. There are frauds which affect personal customers, business customers. It's customers or companies pretending to be who they're not, just literally to get hardware, to get mobile phones out. So there are a number of different types of frauds. And all these organisations have massive amounts of data. And with telecoms, every time, it's like with a bank transaction, every time you use your card, it creates an electronic record and it whizzes around wherever it needs to go. And if you're abroad, it's done in seconds or a fraction of a second. With telephones, mobile, bear in mind, these things, they're people's lives now. Some people depend on absolutely everything with these. Just to go off track, story of my daughter. My daughter, when she was in her early teens, she had her first smartphone, and she was very proud of it. And what did her dad do? Dad washed some of her stuff with it, with the phone still in the pocket. And of course, I was the worst dad in the world. I may still be, but at that time, I was the worst dad in the world, because everything was on here, and she was beside herself with that.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely everything.
That hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is there is now more information that's stored on here, data that's available through here, entire lives. And you see how some people are physically and mentally affected by the fact they've had their phone stolen, because there is so much data on there. And it's the data which is probably the bit that's most important. The phone itself is a piece of hardware. It's identified through an IMEI number, which is a unique
Yeah.
number to the phone. They're blocked in the UK when you report a phone. There are processes in places to block them further abroad if they're, but these are sent abroad, and they will, particularly because they don't have an encryption model in them, so they will go to countries where they do have them, and they will sell for thousands and thousands of.
Okay, so I must be, if you like, misunderstand, because this certainly, so this telecom provider for fraud, and so that's way out of my kind of comfort zone. So maybe I'm fundamentally misunderstanding what it is. I simply thought it would be I mean, I say Vodafone. I love Vodafone. I've got so many Vodafone devices, but again, I thought
there are other network providers.
Yeah, of course there are. But okay, so it sounds like it's not just the minutes. It's when do the fraudsters also kind of make off with all the data as well? I mean, how does that work?
So there is a huge market for data, and there is a huge market for people who sell the phones, steal the phones, to actually sell that data. That data will be aggregated, and then that will then be sold on again into the potentially third parties who will then use that possibly to, I'm not going to say definitely going to happen, but there is a good likelihood that will end up being in a bank of information, personal information, that can or could be used to create fraud.
Okay.
So when you hear about the data breaches in some of the large organisations,
Okay.
and you'll get a letter about saying you now need to contact like CIFAS or somebody like that or the banks may need additional information when you're applying for credit or using your payment card.
And so, kind of coming back to, because ultimately, kind of at the end of this, we're kind of trying to link it back to some sort of payment fraud and some way of kind of thinking about how could we identify this either at the onboarding stage or through maybe the transaction monitoring stage. And so, how do you think these fraudsters, how do they kind of keep getting away with it? They've already set up all the companies that are going to do it, but do they have a vast network? They go to EE, they go to Vodafone, they go to those are the two I know. I mean, I'm sure there's many more. And they just go to all of them.
Part of my career was working at Vodafone. I know you mentioned Vodafone in their corporate security group.
Yeah.
So the data. Again, we come back to data. There is massive amounts of data, but it's not. And you see this quite a lot at the moment with courses and people teaching and talking about open source intelligence, OSINT. It's a fabulous thing. It's absolute, and it is and can be really useful, as is the closed data.
What you're saying is we need some sort of repository, but not just the repository, some way of analysing that data?
So every organisation will have its own data warehouse where everything sits, and it will either be in-house or it will be tasked out. The businesses will have analysts and business specialists within their organisation who will be able to extract certain data. They'll write a script for it if need be to bring the data out. KPIs and monthly information reports, things like that, they all come from reports, exception reports that are written and data taken out of the data warehouse. So having a lot of data doesn't solve the problem. It's actually knowing what do I need to know, what do I need from that, and how do I get that. So that's the clever bit, if you like. And there are some very clever people, and I've been privileged to work with some very clever people, not just at Vodafone, but with other organisations who are able to sit down with me and say, this is what I want to see. And they can go away and get the data that I need. So from telecoms companies, you want to look at and make sure that you don't have a number of different accounts with the same contact telephone numbers, email addresses, postal addresses. Is that postal address a PO box? You shouldn't be having, personally, you shouldn't be having a business with the sole point of contact is a PO box.
Okay, so that's good. So why don't we think about that? So if you like, three ways that a firm could protect itself from fraud in general, but even this kind of fraud is red flags should be raised when?
As soon as you find them. But
Yeah, sorry. I didn't set that question up very well at all. What I meant was we were talking about. Yeah, I didn't set that up very well. So basically, the three controls. If you could only put three controls in place,
yeah,
what three would they be?
they would be at the customer. Well, primarily at the customer take on, and it's about. It says it in the word KYC, know your customer.
Yeah.
Or KYCB, I think Martin calls it, which is know your customer's business.
Yeah.
So let's know, are they who they are? Are they where they say they are? Do they do what they say they do? Three simple questions. And then following on from that is, do the transactions, once the account's been running, do the transactions match the first three? Are they who they say they are? Are they where they say they are? Do they do the business they say they do? If you're looking at, and I know, I'm sorry if I'm repeating this, but I know Martin has a thing at the moment about roofing fraud. I'm sure he's told you.
He exhausted me. Martin exhausted me talking about roofing
he's probably
fraud.
told you about the guy that called at his front door as well.
Yeah, he has.
Which is very opportunistic because he was actually researching that at the moment. So if you have, for instance, a roofing company, but you don't see any transactions in there in relation to buying stock, which they need for doing roofing, or even equipment for.
What really kind of motivates you to, get involved in kind of education and teaching people about, fraud investigation, and kind of why you decided, do you know what I'm going to do this morning? I'm going to design a fraud investigation training course. So great. What?
Can I take you back a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
I'll go back, and again, goes back to my time at Vodafone, and like every organisation, and there are other mobile service providers, they're affected by fraud and bad debt. So how do you work to stop that? So who do you ask? So there's education towards the customers, but there's only so much that you can do. It's improved nowadays with the improvements around social media, certainly, and there's some fabulous campaigns that you can see out there. But it was actually using an internal security awareness program, which they set up while I was there. And after 12 months, it was probably one of the most successful things that I saw working.
Brilliant.
It wasn't actually related to investigation work. It was actually educating the people that work within the business that this is what fraud looks like. This is what investigators do. This is why they do it, and this is how you can help. And that was actually run by two graduate on the graduate entry scheme, and I'm not allowed to swear, so I won't say. They were absolutely effing brilliant, both of them. They both got stuck into it over a period of 6 months, and they created a program which, as far as I'm aware, is still running today with its improved versions. So that told me that you can actually do something if you put your mind to it. You don't have to have hundreds of people sitting around working on different types of project to make this one thing. This was two people who enlisted the help of a number of different departments and every single employee within the business over a period of 12 months. And I was really, really impressed with that. So I thought, well, I go out and investigate, and I go out and I then spoke to the people that they spoke, particularly around the sales teams, the credit teams, particularly the people doing the vetting. And said, what do you need? And they said, we'd really like to know a bit more about this. So we helped, with the help of some of my guys, we rewrote with the sales teams some of the credit vetting processes, and we offered them our services to do the credit vetting, which included using the onboarding data. It was really successful.
Excellent.
It reduced the amount of clients I had on. Sometimes the sales guys weren't absolutely happy with that, but I put separate sessions in place with the sales guys to explain this is what I'm doing. I'm not here to chop your legs off. I'm actually here to make your job easier. Got the message across eventually, but it was difficult to do that. But you got the message. But it's about speaking to people and actually being honest and open with them and explaining to them, I'm not here to ruin your life. I'm here to stop the company losing money. If the company loses money, people lose their jobs. We lose customers. We lose jobs. You don't get a pay rise. You don't get a bonus. It seems very simple, but then you then take that on into looking at how frauds work.
But yeah, protecting profit is absolutely number one.
But when you look, again, there's a victim at the end of every single fraud, and that's the bit that gets me. And if that was my mum, my wife, my kids, or any friends of mine who've been affected by fraud, you would want to do something about it. So wherever you go, there is always a way, and when you look at what information is available and what resources you have, there is always a solution. And I genuinely, honestly believe that there is always a solution to any problem that happens. It just might not be the one that you were looking for or you even want, and you might not like to hear it, but you still have to hear it to know that there is a way that you can actually, I'm not going to defeat it. I know we've had this conversation earlier on when we've been speaking. You're not going to solve every single fraud.
Yeah, we can't stop fraud. You can't have. You might have.
You can make an impact on it.
Yeah, you can you can have an impact. You might say we've got zero tolerance for fraud. Yeah, fine. You may have zero tolerance, but you can't completely eradicate it. I guess what I think I'd really like to know is kind of on top of all those experiences that you had, and with the two grads that built that training course back in the day, what is it that really kind of motivates you to show people the way, if you like. So this is we can't fix this 100%, but
because I know it will work.
Yeah, okay.
And it's around it isn't. If I say it isn't difficult, I'm going to have people going, yes, it is. You don't know, you don't understand. I don't understand everything, but I do know that if I see something which isn't working and there is a potential solution for it, I feel as though it's wrong for me not to say something about it. So if you have, I'm going to go back to I can't talk about a lot of the stuff that happened when I was working with the NFIB, which is National Fraud Intelligence Bureau. That's the back end of Action Fraud, which is now Report Fraud under their new rebadge. It's a brilliant idea. Take every single fraud, comes through a single portal, which is through Action Fraud, either by phone or online. If you go to a police station, they'll tell you to report it to Action Fraud, unless it's a fraud in action happening at the time, in which case there are certain steps they have to do. Every single fraud that's reported comes into the NFIB and it's triaged. It's looked at. The problem is over 500,000 fraud reports come in a 12-month period.
So 500,000 fraud reports come in a 12-month period.
So there's not a lot that I can actually go into any massive details about how NFIB works, other than the fact that it does actually work. It sometimes can be really frustrating, but you can actually see that there is an awful lot of fraud that comes in. It's triaged, where there are lines of inquiry. Those should be followed to a point where you identify a good guy or a bad guy. You can then refer that out to the force or the police area where that fraud occurred. And that way there should be some sort of action. But it falls down to resource and volume. The volume of frauds against the resources available to deal with it.
So actually, in some ways, do you think that building these training courses to help people investigate fraud and improve their skill, do you think that'd have an impact on? I mean, that's got to have an impact in some way.
The answer is yes. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think it would.
Yeah, of course.
So the things that you can see patterns, you can see data that's available, you can see the MO, you can see the
EMO?
MO? Modus operandi.
Oh yeah, sorry. MO.
So, MO,
sorry. Yeah.
So it's the same with frauds in banks. There is a certain amount of information which would lead you to believe that there is a fraud happening. The difference between the police prosecuting a case and banks looking at whether they validate or don't validate an APP fraud, or whether something is a fraud and is the balance of probability versus beyond all reasonable doubt, which is the police side. The balance of probability is the civil side. So trying to get frauds into the police for prosecution, not going to diss the police at all, because the resources just aren't there. I'm sure if there were, they would.
Well, I've got a City of London police pen right here.
So do I.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, no, we every so often we interact with Cyber Griffin. I think they're great, but stretched, I guess.
So I've worked with a couple of guys that are currently on Cyber Griffin, when I was working with the NFIB. Good guys. There are a lot of people in there with a lot of knowledge, a lot of skill, and a lot of passion, who want to do an awful lot for people where they can. And I think that's the problem for the bank's point of view, is that there is a remedy. It's not a remedy, but there is some processes that they can adopt, which is going to impact positively on from an investigation point of view. It's about disrupting. It's about knowing what to look for, how to look for it. But the other thing around it is about making sure that any investigation process take place follows a set of rules and protocols. It's not designed to be along the lines of Police and Criminal Evidence Act, because that's geared towards police officers, but it sets a standard, puts a code of conduct and a code of standard in place, which from a best practice point of view is what banks should be adopting, because it's about recording everything you do. There's an ethics behind what you do. It must be proportionate. Proportionate is a big thing, and it comes back down to data. Just because you've got 1 trillion terabytes of data doesn't mean you need
Information do you need to look should be there,
yes.
but you either said or you implied but isn't. Now, what sort of information should be there but isn't?
Change of address, change of telephone number, change of directors of a company. Any change to the account process, has that been registered? Has it been followed up? Has it been validated?
Okay.
That's probably what, from my experience working on fraud cases, that's probably been the biggest missing bit of information.
Now, that is interesting, because kind of where we kind of think then about kind of periodic refresh and KYC and fraud. So if knowing that an address has changed, directors have changed, and telephone numbers have changed are crucial pieces of evidence, pieces of information in a fraud investigation.
You can use the word evidence.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. In a fraud investigation, then not having those things is a problem. But surely those things should be there. And so why, generally speaking, why do you find these things aren't there?
I agree with you. They should be there, but for whatever reasons, they may not be. The review period may have been missed. The customer may not have told you. Interesting thing for telephone banking or for validation, I imagine your telephone number, particularly for two-factor authentication, would be in there. So changes of telephone number would be quite important. But things like email addresses or telephone addresses, or even a change of occupation if you're a personal customer, things like that. Within the terms and conditions, there should be clauses set out about what, as a customer, you are obliged to notify the company of. And there should be almost like a set of rules that sit across that if you don't do that, there is an outcome potentially which you might not like.
Yeah. So obviously you might not be able to go into details on this, but in fact you definitely won't be able to go into details on it. But in your experience, what are the what are some of the kind of really, really kind of serious gaps that you've seen in fraud controls? Obviously don't say where. But it'd be interesting to know, well, what are they, so that anyone listening say, oh, if we don't have that, we better put that in.
Can't actually answer that, because anybody who looks at my LinkedIn profile will see where I've worked and who I've worked for. So with the greatest of respect, Tom, I can't answer that question. So.
That is a shame. Is there another way I could ask that question so that you could answer it? I'm going to think about that.
So I think it depends. Different companies, organisations, they use different systems. Some people have systems they build internally. NFIB are changing their system. They're upgrading it to a brand new system, which is going to make a huge difference, because it's going to be able to retain more data. A data system that you've had in which is 20 years old is, with all due respect to the organisation that's got it, needs to be updated either from a server capacity side to manage the greater volumes, or it needs to be updated full stop, because real life changes at a rapid pace. And it's expensive to keep up with that. But it's also expensive if you don't keep up with it and you get caught out.
Yeah, that's right. So
and it's difficult. The argument is, I'm damned if I do. I'm potentially broke if I do, but I'm also damned and potentially broke if I don't. Particularly if the regulators come along and there's a big fine. Some of the smaller organisations, if they don't, could potentially be wiped out. Now, I don't know exactly. Again, it's not my sphere of organisation, but from a layman looking at it, that if a small organisation with very tight margins, if you are not cutting corners, but if you are not as proficient as other organisations, you could potentially wipe yourself out with a single regulatory fine.
Yeah, I mean that is possible. So you mentioned something interesting there. Well, a number of things you mentioned are interesting, but one in particular I want to dig into a little bit, what the future looks like. And so if we a lot of people say, oh, look, 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, but I'm just going to say in the future, right, at some point in the future, what do you think's going to become more important than and actually there's something's going to happen and you're going to say, right, actually, do you know what? From now on, all fraud investigations must include these things.
I would like to think that this is something that we're going to start now. Actually get something. There's already a best practice that's out there. If you look at the banks, some banks follow it. There is a College of Policing have their own investigation principles and best practice. You don't have to follow them. It's not mandatory for commercial investigators to follow them, but it's recommended that they follow them, particularly in the spirit of them, because it's a best practice. One of the big things around that is recording everything that you do, which is for me is essential, because if you don't, I call it my 666, 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. Any point in those periods, somebody can come to your bank and say, right, what did you do with this? This is the allegation, what did you do with it? If you can't produce written records which show what you did, why you did, when you did it, and why you did it, more importantly, and what was the outcome, then that's where you start having a problem. So it's not even a pain in the backside. It's something which you really must do. It's something Martin and I learnt at a very early stage in the police, is that you document and you record absolutely everything. Not just the stuff that's likely to prove, but also stuff that's likely to disprove, the negative information. You have to bear in mind that what you're looking to do is trying to prove or disprove. The prosecution side of it is something which is taken elsewhere. So you shouldn't put yourself in a position where, am I going to prosecute this? You need to be in a position where, if it comes to it, I need to be able to say, hand on heart, this record is the best that I could do at the time, and it's got everything I did and everything I didn't do in it. But I've completely drifted away from your question. It's almost like a politician.
Almost,
almost
like a. No, we're going to keep that in. Almost like a politician is what you said. The so coming back onto the question is that in the future, fraud investigations absolutely must include these things.
I think that you should have almost like a checklist for if you're going to conduct any form of investigation outside of the police, which is regulated by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and CIPA, which is the Criminal Investigations Procedures Act, and that's around disclosure and recording. So that's we've taken some of the recording criteria out of that. Outside of the police or police officers or police staff, there should be, in my honest opinion, there should be a standard for if you are investigating.
Or like an ISO standard, perhaps. Fraud ISO standard. Why not?
Why not? There was an ISO standard for many other things, but it's about how do you set that up, because there are a number of organisations where they have dedicated investigation teams. There are a number of organisations where they don't, but they have people who have an investigative capacity. You're going to have a bit of a grey area. But for me, if you're conducting an investigation into any form of financial fraud or any investigation, you should follow a set of rules. And it's around proportionality, it's around ethics, it's around it's lawful and it's justified. And you need to be able to show that you've done all those. You can't go overstepping the mark. And again, if you're looking at a £250 fraud, for instance, and again, not wishing to denigrate someone who's lost £250, if you spend 3 or 4 weeks and throw every single resource at that to try and find...
Yeah, I mean, that's just...
But at the end of the
day...
There
are victims at the end of that, but
there are victims.
Commercially, you're not going to...
But you've got to look at, and you've got to justify, everything you do must be proportionate. It must be justified against what you do and how you do it. It is like a set of rules.
Yeah.
And I generally think there should be those. Just because they are the banks or PSPs or any financial organisation, if you're conducting any investigation, you should follow a set process or protocol.
Yeah. So if you could tell a kind of a risk compliance officer, or actually a fraud investigator, if you could only do one thing this week, go and do it now, what would the answer to that question be?
Good question. I actually think it's about, you can't do everything on your own. So find the departments within your organisation who can help you do what you need to do.
Excellent.
And make them your friend.
Yeah.
You don't have to like them, just make them your friend.
Given that we kind of talk a lot about the demographic of people who are likely to kind of suffer from either investment fraud or romance fraud or roofing fraud, you know, I kind of imagine that demographic might watch soap operas on ITV. Other channels are available, but
A lot of other channels.
So if I said to you, actually, do you know the best way we could reduce certain types of fraud in the UK was for all the big banks to get together and pay for an advert in the break of Coronation Street and Emmerdale, then, you know, that to me sounds like a great idea, because you'll be hitting an enormous amount of people, or put it on during the ad break of the FA Cup final. I mean, because so many people are watching that.
It's an excellent idea. I would absolutely go with that.
You would, yeah?
I would
Maybe we can get people to do that.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? If it makes a difference, you don't plan on solving everything, because you won't be able to, but have an impact on a majority of people. They will thank you for it. Probably not directly, they won't come and shake your hand, but I do believe there has been some campaigns recently with one or two banks or financial institutions who have done joint adverts. I've seen them in newspapers. But bearing in mind we are a social media and a television media, bearing in mind how many different networks are there at the moment you can look apart with Prime, Sky, Netflix?
Yeah, but there must be a way. All right, we've probably got to leave it there. I'm getting the nod from the control tower that, you know, I need to stop. Yeah. So really, really nice talking to you, Graham.
Thank you.
Really nice to see you again, and you know, looking forward to getting you back on, where we're going to talk a little bit more about like the actual product that we're building.
Look forward to it.
Good. Thank you.
Simon.
Cheers.
Cheers.